What happens when life just won't let up? When it feels like every time you stand up, something knocks you right back down. In the last 4 years, Veronica Arrieta has faced more heartbreak than some experience in a lifetime. A postpartum battle that nearly broke her child's cancer diagnosis, a miscarriage, a father's terminal illness, and somehow at the end of all of it, she found herself. Veronica is a powerhouse in the mortgage industry, a successful loan officer, and someone I've had the privilege, and I mean privilege, of calling a friend and a colleague. But beyond the titles, beyond the business success, she's a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a woman who's walked through the craziest tsunami that I've ever seen and made it out the other side. This episode is raw. It's definitely going to bring the tears. It's not a conversation about moving on, because I think some pain stays with you, but it's about what you do with it. If you've ever felt lost in grief, if you've ever questioned how much more you can handle, this episode is for you. Welcome to the Wiggle Room. Veronica, I want to start before everything changed. Who was Veronica before all of this? What did life look like before 2020?
It feels like a lifetime ago. And honestly, I want to take a moment and give love to the Veronica before 2020 because I am not that person anymore. And I think that, as you grow and evolve through life, so much changes. And when you're in it, you don't realize what you have in that moment, and you don't realize how simple it may be. And back then, when I was just a loan officer, before I had kids, yes, I was married. We were in our first couple years of our marriage, and we were traveling, right, and hanging out with our dogs and go hiking in the middle of the day. And my biggest problem was, am I going to get this lead in this application and get it to the closing table? And so I want to give love to the Veronica who, before 2020, thought that her life was hard when she was trying to get that lead to the closing table,
Right.
because that was all she knew. And so much changed after that, and changed really quick.
Yeah, it's crazy how hard we experience different hards, and I'm sure you would choose that hard through all the hards you went through in the past 4 to 5 years. You're a loan officer, a leader in our industry, but like you said, the Veronica before, back then, what did success mean to you?
Yeah, back then it was getting that agent, right, that real estate agent that you've been trying to get to meet you for coffee, to finally agree to meeting you for coffee, gives you that first deal that you're going to crush and give them incredible an experience, help their buyers buy a home and get into home ownership. And that success is just getting to the closing table there, right? And then when it's done, it's over, you go home, you get to go to happy hour, you get to go back and travel and do whatever it is that you as an individual want to do. And that's what I think the Veronica then took for granted, was that it was all of the hards that I felt were just what I felt and what I had to carry for myself. And when we started to grow a family soon after, all that changes.
Right. And then obviously 2020 hits, right? COVID, we all go through it. It changes literally life. You get pregnant, no visitors, no community, just you and Anthony, pregnancy in isolation. What was that like for you?
That was hard. And what made it hard for me was because, I grew up in a really close family unit. We call it the compound. And I live there now. I grew up there before. It's in the heart of Denver, Colorado, on a regular neighborhood block, right? But we have 5 or 6 family homes within a couple of blocks, between my parents, my grandparents, my godmother, other aunts. And so I grew up always around family and always around people. And so I always knew I wanted to be a mom. I knew that was something that always called on my heart. And when I always envisioned that, I envisioned it with my family surrounding me and with them through my pregnancy. And outside of that, being able to build another community between prenatal yoga classes or in-person birthing classes, all these things that you're supposed to be able to do especially when you're having your first child and you have no idea what you're getting into. And COVID hits and all that's gone. And not only is all of that gone, but also everything's really scary. Like we didn't know how dangerous COVID would be to a pregnancy, especially because I found out I was pregnant in February of 2020, right? COVID hits next month.
Next month, yep.
And so it's so early on that we didn't know how much I had to protect myself and protect the baby. So we over isolated to overprotect myself. And so because of that, it was lonely. And I'm grateful that we did have Anthony. Anthony's sister was renting from us at the time. She lived in our basement. So her and her boyfriend were part of our like little community, which I am incredibly grateful. We at least had that, right? Because we could have little family dinners together. And they were there for like little milestones and doctor's appointments to share. But it was really hard to think about bringing a new human into this world that's supposed to be a community effort and raising, children through community without community.
Right. Yeah. That dynamic in raising, or beginning to raise a child during COVID got to be super difficult. What do you think that it did to you in that like moment of like getting ready to bring somebody into the world?
So what I'd say is it did cause me and allow me to kind of like bring it back to myself as much as I could. And I would say like, I was like, okay, if I don't have community and I don't have these classes in person with people and I can't touch and feel the real life, right? Like, what can I control? I've always been a very like, what can I control? And so what I could control was then my experience within my body and my pregnancy and my connection to my son. And as hard as COVID was, and the isolation was hard, and I would, go back and want to have everyone around me, it also really brought a lot of stillness to me and quiet and time for me to center with myself and this growing baby, to where I did really feel like I had such a good connection with him, so that when it was time for him to come into the world, even though there was still a lot of uncertainty and the hospital was lonely also because it was just me and Anthony, right? You couldn't have visitors at the hospital at that time. But it was like I was able to communicate with this baby to bring him into the world. And as hard as COVID was, what I do have gratitude for is the quiet that it gave me so that I could do that.
And I heard you mention this. You think it deepened your connection with AJ?
Yeah.
Okay. And I want to segue into something because I know you dealt with this, and it was postpartum depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've told me about it, and I think so many women go through it. We don't talk about it enough. 2 questions. 1, when did you realize that you were struggling with it? And 2, do you think any of that is tied to how you spent time being pregnant?
Mm-hmm. So I noticed it right away. AJ's birth was as perfect as a birth could be. It was everything that I had planned for and prepped for and envisioned. And I was able to bring him into the world. It was kind of crazy. It was, it was unmedicated, which is a whole nother...
The hard way.
Yeah. But it was like, the thing I'd say is until you have a birth unmedicated, you don't know how bad it's going to get. So you go into it and you're like, oh, I can do this thing.
Right.
And then by the time it gets really hard, there's no turning back. So you just have to finish it out. But it was beautiful, and we had that connection and everything was there. And so and I felt that, and I had that, but I was only able to hold on to it for a couple of days before the sadness and the postpartum started to hit. And so for AJ, before we left the hospital, so we spent 2 nights in the hospital. Before we left the hospital, the nurses came in and said that he had lost too much weight. And so they weigh the babies all the time to make sure that, if you are breastfeeding, that they're getting enough milk and they're, getting what they need. And so they told us that he reached the limit where he's lost too much weight. And so we now have to start supplementing the feeding. And going into that birth, I was very adamant that I wanted to breastfeed. I thought that was what we were supposed to do. I thought that was what would be best for my child. And that was where I put all of my eggs into that basket and went full force into it. And so when the nurse came in to tell me that I had to start supplementing, then it already right then started having me question my body's ability. Like, can my body care for this baby? Like, I just grew this baby. I just brought this baby into this world. But like, now can my body care for him and give him what he needs? And so we started supplementing originally with breast milk, with donor's breast milk from the hospital. But because I was so stuck in wanting to make breastfeeding work, I wasn't open to starting with a bottle yet or to start formula feeding. And so we had to do something called a triple feeding system, through which is like a little tube that you like put breast milk in, and then it comes down and you like attach it to your boob and get that into the baby's mouth all at the same time while you're, 48 hours postpartum. So tried to do that, did that for as long as we could. But a week later, when we went into his pediatrician to get his checkup, he had lost even more weight, and it was starting to become a dangerous amount of weight that he had lost. And it was between the feeling of my body not being able to produce what he needed, it was also me questioning, how come I haven't been noticing how much weight he's lost? I should know if something's wrong with my baby. Like they say, like that mother's instinct and you should have it, but I didn't know anything was wrong. And so that is what I think triggered my postpartum, on top of the isolation that I was already feeling through COVID. Because even then, right, like I don't have other women around me to help me and support me through this. It was just me and Anthony and this little baby who I couldn't provide nutrition to.
Mm. And so crazy. That's a crazy story. And so how do you so postpartum depression, right? Like what did that feel like? What did you experience?
It was heavy. It was, especially in the first couple months of AJ's life, when I was still trying really hard to make breastfeeding work. Like I would say, like, if I could feed him with my tears, he would be fine.
Wow.
Because that's how hard it was. And after about 6 weeks was when I decided I couldn't try anymore, and that it wasn't healthy for me mentally to put myself through trying to make it work. And we tried everything between, like, I had multiple lactation consultants. I was on all the supplements, doing all the things. I even had an ultrasound done of my boob to see, like, if something's wrong.
Right.
And everything always checked out. And it just came down to my body doesn't do it. And so we had to make the decision then to move full on to formula. And though that gave me some relief, because then I could sleep a little bit more, I knew he was getting fed, I knew he was getting what he needed, it also felt like I failed. And especially when there's a space where, like, breast is best, if you've ever heard of that term before.
This is new
like,
to me, but I'm listening. Like
in the mom sphere, right? Where people say, like, breast is best and you should always breastfeed and whatever it takes and this and that. It was really hard for me to fail at, in my mind, is what I felt at the time. And like there was even a specific breastfeeding book where I got to the chapter about, but what if it's not working? And in that book it said, it never doesn't work, you just didn't try hard enough. And it was like a dagger.
I hate that.
To my heart.
Yeah. I think anyone who was experiencing what you were experiencing, and to read that and to receive that message, I think in your normal space, you may be able to work through that, right? But in that space, that probably does feel like death.
Oh yeah.
And so because we're just getting started. We're just getting started in our story. So AJ is born in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
What month?
October.
Okay, so then you open your mortgage. When did you open?
The next year.
Okay, the next year. Okay.
Yeah, so I had postpartum depression for about a year.
Okay.
From when he was born until
the following year. Okay, so then you have AJ October 2021, and then you're dealing with postpartum depression. October 2022 comes around. You get to open your branch, you're finally in leadership as a branch manager. It's a virtual branch, right? And then a month later, you get a diagnosis that AJ has cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Take me to that moment, and what did that feel like?
Yeah. So we're a year ahead. So he was born in October 2020, and then postpartum depression until 2021. And then, yes, in October of 2021 was when I opened the virtual branch, right? So we opened the virtual branch. Things seem good. I finally feel like I'm out of the fog of postpartum depression. And I would say at least for me, it was like it kind of naturally came out around that year. So I would say if someone is dealing with it or going through it, yes, like, is there opportunity to get help and support? You can. I wish I did. But also naturally our hormones balance out and things just you start to get a better handle of things. And that's what I felt, right, by October of 2021, where I was like, oh yeah, like I opened up this virtual branch, like I'm in this leadership role. I love the people I'm leading. I'm excited for what's to come. And shortly after, AJ's diagnosed with cancer. And so there are these like before times and after times, I feel like, that some people may have in their lives. And for me, it was AJ's diagnosis with cancer. There was a me and a world before AJ was diagnosed with cancer, and there was a me and a world after. And I remember that day and every moment of that day. And how it all happened was when he had his first, his 1-year appointment with a pediatrician. They do like all these like checkups, right? And the nurse came in and turned the lights down and pulled out a phone. It was like a little app. And she was like, just have him look here and I'm going to take a picture. And so we're like, okay. So she takes a picture. And she was like, I can't figure it out. Like, something's wrong. I'm going to do it again. So she did it again. Like, okay. And she was like, yeah, something's still off. I'm going to try one more time. So she tries one more time. And she was like, I don't know. I'm just going to give it to the pediatrician and he'll come in and talk to you about it. So we're like, okay. Pediatrician comes in, looks at it, and he was like, yeah, it's this new technology we got that's to be an initial screen for kids' eyes, like to see if they need glasses or if they have an astigmatism or different things like that. So it's just saying that something abnormal is coming up. He was like, we don't really know, but what we can say is for you to go meet with a pediatric optometrist. They gave us a card, and they're like, just try to do that between now and your next appointment. And so at that point, our next appointment would have been in like 3 to 6 months. And it didn't seem urgent. It was just like, he might need glasses, it might be an astigmatism. So we're like, okay, we'll do it. So we didn't think much of it. I had the card in my wallet and like we were going to book that appointment in the near future. Well, then the next week, I came home from work and I was playing with AJ and I called him and he looked at me and his right eye looked at me, but his left eye didn't. And it was a split second. And when he looked at me, his left eye, like when I saw his left eye, something was off. Like I couldn't explain what it was, but it was just something was different. But then it went right back to normal and he was playing. And I even like doubted myself of like, did I see that? It's been a long day. I don't know. And so we put AJ to bed and I was up late working and my mom called me because she watches our kids. And she said, have you noticed anything with AJ's eye? And I said, which eye? And she said, his left eye. I was like, well, what did you see? And she explained to me the same thing that I had seen, that she was changing his diaper and his right eye looked at her and his left eye didn't. And that she had doubted herself until my sister came over later, saw the same thing, and then brought it up to my mom. And so then I was like, yeah, I saw that too. I saw it today. I'll call the doctor tomorrow and see if we can get him in as soon as possible just to see what it is. So make an appointment for the following week to get him in. Between that week's time, I had Googled all the possible things it could be, right? All the possible things it could be. The worst thing that came from my Google search was something called strabismus, which is just like a lazy eye. Like the nerves around your eye like aren't strong enough, so we have to make them stronger so it wanders. So we went into that appointment fully prepared for it to be strabismus. We were going to get diagnosed with strabismus. He was going to have a patch he'd have to wear on his eye just to strengthen, this other eye. And then we'd be on our way. So that morning, we got up to go to the appointment, me, Anthony, and AJ. And I remember even like, I was like annoyed even that morning of just the stuff. Like our dogs are out of control. I need to work. We have to go to this appointment. We're running late. There's traffic, like all these things. We booked the appointment first thing in the morning. after that afternoon, I was like booked with clients and appointments and meetings. We were going to take AJ to my parents. He was going to be there the rest of the day. We go to the appointment, check in. First off, a pediatric optometrist appointment is brutal because you are holding down a 1-year-old as you are prying open their eyes, right, for a doctor to look at them, because you can't tell a 1-year-old to keep your eye open. So it was rough to start with, of just like what it took for them to look at his eye. But then it was someone would come in and look at his eye. They would look and not really say much and then leave. And there wasn't like, and then another person would come in and look at his eye and then leave. And we're still not getting any information. And now I'm just more annoyed again because of like, it's hard enough to have you guys look at his eye. Like, what is going on? Do we have to do this again? The third doctor comes in. Her name's Dr. Reem. And AJ was sitting on my lap and she looked at his eye real quick. It wasn't very long. And she pulled back and she said, I see vision and mobility issues in his left eye. And I was like, okay, great. Like strabismus, right? Because I was convinced it was strabismus. I was like, great, we're going to get a patch. And she goes, no, I see a mass. It's a tumor, which is retinoblastoma, which is cancer. And it was like the world turned upside down very quickly. And then she said that she couldn't see his retina and she couldn't see the back of his eye. And so the cancer may have taken over his sight. It may have moved to his brain, and it could be in his other eye. And we got all of that in about a minute.
Jeez.
And so we were just like, what does that mean? Like, what do we do? And she said we needed to see a specialist as soon as possible because it's a very aggressive cancer. And if it is in his brain, that's very dangerous. And so like, okay, how do we get to a specialist? She was like, well, there's a specialist in Aurora, which we live in Denver. So Aurora's like 15 minutes away from us in Colorado. She was like, I'll make a personal phone call to his office today. You need to get in as soon as he can see you. And so we said, okay. And leaving that office is still, I think, one of the like hardest things I've ever done. We still see Dr. Reem, and I love Dr. Reem. It was a big decision between Anthony and I to go back to her after that because of how painful it was to hear that information. But we also realized how grateful we were for her for finding it, and to put ourselves in her shoes of knowing within those seconds that she looked in his eye, she then had to look at us and break our world completely. And to be able to do that with like compassion and care and composure is impressive.
Very.
And it's something we'll, like always be grateful for her for. And so we do see her, but we will not go back to that office. Luckily, she works out of 3 different offices in the Denver metro area. So we drive now further, but because leaving that office was surreal. I remember like trying to check out and I needed to pay something and I didn't understand what they were asking me to do, to the point where I just like gave them my wallet and I was like, I don't know what you want me to do. So just do what you need to do. And then getting to the car, even and putting AJ in and just holding him and not knowing. Because at that moment, we didn't know, and at that moment, it may be in his brain. And the drive home, because as I mentioned, we live in a compound, right? And I live there now too. So earlier that year in 2021, we had moved ourselves into the compound, which is where we live now. So I live directly across the street from my parents, right next door to my 92-year-old grandmother, right? So we are all right there. So any other time we would be coming home, my parents would have their door open, my grandma would have the door open, everybody would be waving and saying hello. And so I had to send a text message to my parents just saying that I couldn't tell them anything yet, but that I needed them to close the door and not come outside, and to tell grandma to not come outside, and that we would share as soon as we could, but that AJ wasn't going over to them and we just needed some time. And that was one of the like hardest things I've had to say to them because I couldn't share anything, but we also needed a moment to just get us inside. Yeah.
Man, well, thank you for sharing. That's a heavy story, and I want to take a positive note. I think it's really cool, the family dynamic. On I think that's something we all, I think, could strive for. I think that's a very beautiful story. What was it like to process, your kid having cancer as a mother?
It, what I would say is I'm probably still processing it. I think I'm actively processing it. In the beginning, it was so much happened so fast. So from getting home, like we get him home, by the time we get him home, we get a call from the specialist asking if we could make it in at 3:00 that day. And so we said yes. So we loaded him back up, went to the specialist. And when we got there, it was just everything was ready to go. They had the team assembled, they had our calendar, they had everything was put together and ready to go for what we needed to do before he was even officially diagnosed yet. And so everything just moves so fast that I don't know that I allowed myself to process it. And I just leaned into like the steps of all of it. What I will say though, when it came to those very like initial stages and feelings there was a lot of blame and it was self-blame, a lot of self-blame and guilt of what did I do to cause him to have cancer? His specific cancer, it can be either genetic or a completely random mutation. And if it's a completely random mutation and it just happens, and it happens when they're about 6 weeks gestation. So when I was only about 6 weeks pregnant would be when this mutation happened. And so it's like I went down a spiral of I didn't even know I was pregnant at 6 weeks. Like, did I eat like blue cheese?
Right.
Like
Right.
all of the things that he could have done to cause this. And the reality is, and I know that I didn't, there was nothing that I did. There's nothing I could have done. It was random. But sometimes like when you don't know the answers to something, it may bring comfort just to place the blame, even if that blame's on yourself.
That's it's a realistic reflection. Yeah, I heard you mentioned, you just wanted to know where this came from. And so you started down the path of, did I eat blue cheese? Did I do this? It's my fault. We can become the craziest authors sometimes when we don't have the answers. And sometimes it can be very bad for ourselves, but at least you were aware of that. And I hope that you didn't carry that for too long. Cause I'm sure, like you said, there was a lot of moments of spiraling, but that's gotta be tough to deal with. You're you're a business owner, right? You're a leader. Someone who built it all together. Just having to hold it all together. How did you not allow yourself to break in that moment?
No, it was. So I would give myself every morning in the shower to break. And it was a very like deliberate thing and time that I gave myself to fall apart. And it was every morning in the shower was when I was able to let it all out and cry and be mad and curse the world and do whatever I needed to do. And what I told myself was when I turned off the water, I had to pull it together and get back out. Because at that point, like one for AJ, because kids don't know, they don't have the tools or the ability to regulate their own emotions and their nervous system. They rely, like, yes, some kids have different temperament levels and, there is some nature there, but they also really rely on the people who keep them safe, like their caregivers and their parents and the people around them to determine like how their nervous system should react. And so I knew that, and I knew how strong my connection with AJ always was, even when he was inside of me. And so I knew that I had to regulate myself so that he knew that he was safe and he could regulate himself to go through this battle. And so the only time I let myself break was in the shower. When it came to work stuff, the people that I was able to lead and had the privilege of leading for many years, one, I love them, and we hand selected our group to be together. And our group was made on vulnerability and authenticity and collaboration. And so yes, I was still leading them and was still strong. And I was also comfortable and safe enough with that community to be vulnerable and to break down and to tell them how hard this was. And I think our group as a whole was stronger for that because they knew I was a person and they were there to support us through it. But I would say it definitely put things in perspective for work stuff too. When it came to, I remember one time during one of AJ's chemo treatments, I was waiting outside of the intensive care unit because after his chemo treatments, he had a different type of chemo. That's not intravenous chemotherapy that goes through your whole body. It's a more specialized treatment plan. And he would have to lay flat after for 4 hours in the pediatric intensive care unit. And I remember one time my phone was just blowing up and I stepped out of his unit to take the call. And it was just like, a borrower who did not need something right this second, but is panicking and like needed my attention in this moment. And so what it taught me, like through all of it, was just like the perspective of it all, of that borrower on the phone has no idea what I am looking at and like what is on the other side of this glass. Right. And as much as I can, want to curse that or be angry about that or annoyed at it, I also have to put myself in their shoes of this home purchase is the biggest thing in their life and on the other side of their glass. And so it was a really interesting, time for me to figure out what is important and recognizing that what's important to each of us is important to each of us individually. Just like we may never understand each other's hard, but we also can never compare each other's hard.
I love that. Yeah, I think sounds like you had empathy. You understood empathy a little bit more on a different level, going through all of that stuff. Now I want to fast forward a little bit. My timelines might be off, so please correct me, right? Because this is your story. So April 2022.
Yeah.
AJ is in remission.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're excited. He's in remission. This is a moment that you should be celebrating, right? Mm-hmm. But then 2 months later in June, you have a miscarriage. So we've got pregnancy, COVID, son has cancer, he comes back, he's in remission, postpartum depression, then we think we're feeling good, and then boom, you have a miscarriage. How did you even begin to, how do you handle all that grief in such a short amount of time?
Yeah. I would say during that time, I wasn't yet processing any of the grief. And I'm only recently processing most of the grief from the last 4 years. At that time, it felt like such a blow. Like when we were told, when we started AJ's cancer journey, the thing that Anthony and I would tell each other was to celebrate the small wins as we would get there. We didn't know, in the beginning, how long it was going to take us to get to remission. We didn't know, any complications. We didn't know. So it was just celebrate the small wins. So the small wins we could get, whether it was like a good blood draw or like a successful exam under anesthesia, like those are the small wins, and we would take them and hold on to them. And we wanted to grow our family before AJ was diagnosed with cancer. We were going to start trying like around his first birthday. But when all of this happened, of course, we're like, no, like our full focus is here with AJ. That's what we need to do. So we get that remission. the remission call in April, and it was a massive celebration for us. It felt like he did it. Like it worked, this tornado that we have been in over the last 6 months. Like we made it to the end of it. He's going to be okay. And we were like, okay, now we can see what it looks like to grow our family again, because the last 6 months were just, like tunnel vision, all focused on AJ. And so when I found out I was pregnant, I knew early on, because we were planning it. So I knew right away. But it was so early that when the miscarriage happened that we hadn't yet told people that I was pregnant.
Mm.
And in looking back on that, I think that was the hardest part, was that when we went through the miscarriage, because we were excited, our little family was excited. We were telling AJ about it.
Oh, wow.
And we would talk to the baby in my stomach every night and tell him good night. And so when the miscarriage happened, nobody other than us knew that I was pregnant to start with. So there wasn't a circle of people, to share in that and support in that. And so that, what I learned through that was, these rules about when to share the good news, like a pregnancy, or when to share whatever it is that's on someone's heart that's happening. Maybe it's okay to just share it. Because the people who are in your corner and the people who are cheering for you are going to be sending their love and energy towards you as it's happening. And if it doesn't happen, they're going to be the ones that pick you up and help you work through it instead of doing it alone.
Would you say that was one of your lessons through that moment?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think people, they hold back a lot of times from telling people about pregnancy because of, tragic moments like that. So you're like, were you still going to work, like still showing up, like all of this stuff, like while all these, like you're handling all this stuff, like how, yeah, like were you at work? Were you still going to work? Like how did you balance it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like with the miscarriage specifically, it started at work.
Man.
Mm-hmm. And I knew once it started, and the next day, so
you knew in the moment?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I knew what was likely happening. Like, of course you want to hope for the best, but
Right.
it was like something's off, and so the next day, so I think that was like a Thursday when it started, and I was at work. I was at the office. And then I went home and I told Anthony that I thought I was starting to have a miscarriage and something's wrong, and that I'd called the midwives in the morning. And the next morning on the way to work, I do remember I did call some support in to help in the office and just told them, like, I think I'm having a miscarriage. And so I'm on my way to the office because I have a meeting, and I will do that meeting. And then I am not sure what I will do after that. And so
you went to the meeting.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just such a, because of, I know I have experienced a lot, but it's also, I know that we've all experienced a lot. And when you think about like everyone we meet on the street, right? I do this like weird little exercise even when I'm like driving to work or on the way to the airport today. I think about everyone who is also driving to the airport and like, what was their last 24 hours like? Like, where are they going? Are they going to get like some like exciting news and meet maybe a new member of the family? Are they on their way to a funeral? Like it's just recognizing that everyone has so much. And so for me in that moment, what I told myself for that meeting was, for the people who wanted to meet with me and trusted me with helping them look for home ownership, was I don't know what it took them to get to that moment to be able to meet with me that day. And so for an hour, I can package up what I have going on, and I will ask for the support for after. But for that hour, I will be there with them because they decided to be there with me.
I don't really even know what to say after that. Really, like that's, man. How do you even be present in that moment?
Yeah, it was, I did call. What helped me in that moment was I did call the midwives before, just to explain what was happening and what I should do, and got the reassurance I needed that there was nothing that I could do or not do to change whatever was going to happen. And so for me, that brought comfort, just because, if they would have told me, go lay down and drink tea and do this, this, and this, and maybe it won't happen, then I probably would have canceled the meeting, right? And done those things. But when they told me that there's nothing you can do or not do, what is going to happen with this pregnancy is what's going to happen. And it was not your fault to start with. And it won't be your fault if it doesn't make it. Then that's what allowed me to then be present for that next, couple of hours.
The acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
That was a quick acceptance. I think 99.99% of people wouldn't have been able to show up to that meeting. Again, it's just, that's what this story is about, is your strength, and which is one of the reasons why I admire you so much. You said something really beautiful in there, though, about exercise or practice that you do on the way to work every day. I thought that was really cool. It's the first time I've heard you say it. And did you think that practice of like picturing where everyone is going, does that allow for like more gratitude into your day? Is that one of the reasons why you do it?
Yeah. And understanding and compassion for other people. Just because I think, there's so many little things that can annoy us during the day or sway us, or, the one person that cut you off, or, the server that doesn't give you the best service, or whatever it is. And it just is something I've always done, even since I remember doing it as a child, sitting in the back seat of my parents' car and looking around and thinking what is their life like? What are they going through, and what are they doing, and where are they going? And driving through different neighborhoods, especially in Denver, of how different is their life from mine? And so it's what's always allowed me to give people the benefit, even more than the benefit of the doubt, because you never know what someone's going through. And so that person that cut you off, they may have just gotten the worst call of their life, and they may need to get to their loved one right now. And we don't know that.
What a beautiful perspective. If you're listening to this, I hope that you can adopt that and practice it, because I think it allows for more grace and allows you to live more, and I'm sure you would say this, but allows you to live with more peace in your life.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I want to go to the next part of your story. So you had your miscarriage. I still can't believe you showed up to that meeting. That's crazy. But 2 months later, you experienced another big wave in your life. Your dad, who was your guy, your best friend, your everything. You guys are twins. You guys are truly twins. He's diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Mm-hmm.
What was the hardest part of that diagnosis for you?
So that one, I would say, is the one that broke me, and that broke my outlook on how I've always moved through the world. And I remember vividly when we got that diagnosis, I said out loud to the universe that I couldn't take anymore. And that was really hard for me, because I've always been someone who has felt connected with people and with community and with the universe, and who feels the energy and is open to whatever comes and the opportunity. And I even when we went through everything with AJ, though I will never tell anyone that everything happens for a reason, because I think that's a little too glossy and could be hard to sit with.
Right.
What I will say for me is that I believe that everything that happens is an opportunity to learn and grow and evolve and decide how you're going to respond.
Yes.
And so even with AJ, I could do that. And when we went through it with AJ, I had a mantras for him, and I had a practice of what I would tell him. And, I could handle that, and then even when the miscarriage happened, it was, I remember the last day that the pregnancy was in me, and I said goodbye to it that night because I knew that it was ending. But then it was I can do that. I was okay, I can do this again. But then when my dad was diagnosed with cancer, out of the blue, he went from being what seemed like healthy, normal, in his late 60s, active, to he had a pain in his side and he didn't know where the pain was coming from. They thought it was a muscle strain. It got better. So it seemed like it could have been a muscle strain that healed, and then the pain came back. And we find out it's stage 4 liver cancer that's terminal and incurable. And I remember cursing the universe and cutting it out, because that is what broke me.
So it's a heavy amount of like grief to go through in such a short amount of time. Do you think that it was just the culmination of all the things you're like, yo, like I'm throwing up my hands, like this is it, like what else you got, like what else do you got for me? Like, was it just it all added up, or do you think if that was a single moment it wouldn't have felt the same?
I think it all added up. And I think it was the one that I knew I couldn't fix. Like, I knew I couldn't follow the steps to get us to the other side like we could with AJ, right? Like, even when AJ was diagnosed, the prognosis was very good and we had a steps and plan so we could follow that. With the miscarriage, even though it was hard and I sat in that grief, I knew we could try again. When this one hit and there was at first seemingly nothing we could do, then I didn't know how to handle it. I couldn't next step my way through that.
Another moment of some acceptance, some hard acceptance to someone who you described to me as like, it's my hero, you know. And I think that is for a lot of people who have that relationship with their father. Life keeps happening, right? And November 2022, November, when you get pregnant again, is this 20?
Oh yeah, November 2022.
November 2022. You find out you're pregnant again while still just found out that dad was diagnosed with cancer, 3, 4, 5 months prior to that. What did your pregnancy during that time, your new pregnancy, mean to you after everything you had been through up to that point?
It was a confusing time, to be honest. Like, of course we wanted to grow our family, and of course we were glad that it was happening. And at the same time, it was, one, because of the miscarriage, I lost the privilege of believing that a positive pregnancy test meant a baby.
Wow.
Because you didn't know that anymore. And so at what point do I get to be excited this time? You know, like at what point do we get to plan? And what I did do differently was I shared right away. That I will say is we shared early right away, because it was after going through the miscarriage without people knowing. It was, I would rather our community know. And if we all grieve the loss, we grieve the loss together. But then the other part that was really hard was when my dad was initially diagnosed, we were told that he wouldn't have much time without treatment. Now, I don't think he ever heard those words come from the doctor, which was good for his mindset, but we heard them. And the doctor had told us initially that without treatment, he may have a couple weeks, maybe a month to live. And then with treatment, maybe a couple months, at most a year, if the treatment works. And so when I found out I was pregnant and we were doing the math there, right, between a couple of months or maybe a year, was I didn't know if my daughter was going to be able to meet him. And I didn't know if it was fair for him to know that he might not meet her either.
You told me something beautiful, and you said that you thought having your daughter gave your dad a reason to fight. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I definitely think it did. Like, of course, he had many reasons to fight between all of his grandchildren, because they had 8 of them. So all of his grandchildren, and something he would tell us was he was fighting for more weekends. So even when treatments failed, or even when he was put into a clinical trial and it was really hard on his body and, you know, all of the things and lots of unknowns, he would just say, it's 4 more weekends. He was fighting for more weekends with us. And what I think my daughter did was gave him a date to fight for. So yes, he was already fighting for all of us and more weekends, but knowing that she would be born in July of 2023 gave him a clear date and goal to get to when it came to his health. So not just being alive for it, but to hold her, because that was what he would say, that he would hold her. And we named her after him, which I think gave him even more fight and fire and spark to want to hold this little baby Ronnie. And I think it worked. I think it did.
You this is for sure why I get emotional. You shared a picture with me of your dad holding your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
What was that moment like when the first time he got to hold her?
Yeah, that moment was incredible. She was about 6 hours old when he came to the hospital. So not only was it healing for me as a mom, because the last time I had a baby in that hospital, my parents couldn't come because it was during COVID. So it was also kind of healing some of that past trauma and isolation by being able to have my parents be there. But then it was also just knowing that, like, we made it. Like, we made it. And he was strong enough at that moment to walk himself into the hospital and to hold her and to talk to her. And just to know, for her to, in her human form, be able to feel the love and pride that I have felt my whole life from that man.
What do you think it did for your family dynamic in that moment? Like him being there and just being able to hold her?
I think it was just, it felt whole, like it felt very whole, because with my living across the street from my parents, we've always, like, we're there all the time. They see us all the time. And leading up to it, his health started to take a turn right before, to where I had considered asking to induce my labor or have a scheduled C-section earlier. And so I was in a hard position, right? But like the month before she was born, between like, do I make a decision to take her out maybe before she's ready, just so that we can have this moment?
Wow.
Or do I believe in the universe and what is capable and what can be done, and that this moment is going to happen and she's still going to be inside of me as long as she's supposed to? And it just felt really good to see that it was the second option and that it all worked.
How hard was that decision?
Really hard.
It's interesting what happens when you can just let go and trust that life is gonna take care of you, and how it does take care of you. I'm sure in those moments there was the internal battle was probably crazy. Like, should we do this today? Should we do this tomorrow? But it shows a go when you just let go, that it can work out for you. Yeah. That picture tore me up for sure. Thank you for sharing that with me, for sure. That was such a cool moment. And if we'll see if maybe Julio can figure out a way to put that on the YouTube, because it was so cool. And so after Ronnie's born, she was born July 2023.
Yep.
Right? You go back to work. Man, I would have given up, straight up, promise you. I would have given up. But you went to work. Like, how were you even functioning? So if you're like, let's bring the story back, right? So she gets pregnant during 2020, has a baby during COVID, goes through the whole pregnancy thing, then deals with postpartum depression while also managing a branch, being a new branch manager, right? That's not easy just by itself. AJ gets cancer. We come out of cancer. He's in remission. Then we get pregnant again. Then we have a miscarriage. We go to a borrower consultation while we're having a miscarriage, which is absolutely insane. Then your dad gets diagnosed with cancer. Then you get pregnant again, which is, people may not know, but that's, I'm sure, all the emotions that just came along with that, and the fear and the doubt and all that stuff. And then you go back to work. So like, how are you even functioning?
Yeah. I would say, one, birthing people should take off as much time as you possibly can after you have a baby. And what I do and what we do business wise, you know, we don't have maternity leave or time off after. And so the time you take off after is just time you're not getting paid, and you prep for that and you know that, and then you come back and you got to get back to it. And so for Ronnie, I took off 2 months because I will say I did have an incredible team, an incredible assistant who was able to do it and cover so that I could get 2 months off. But then when I came back to it, it was one of those funny moments, because at this point, some of these things are just like, how does things keep happening, right? Like
You just laugh. You laugh about it. You're like, what the hell? Okay, here we go.
Like, okay, let's do that. So I go back September 18th to work, have a list of like how I'm getting started, easing myself in with appointments and calls and doing the activity and all the things. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. I can manage this. Things feel good at home. Dad is doing, you know, like, yes, his health is declining, but it wasn't aggressive. Like, it wasn't a sharp decline yet. So it's like, okay, we can do this. And then October 1st, my dad starts hospice and his health declines quickly. So in that time period, it was like going in, having a meeting with my team about, okay, this is those first couple weeks of this is what I'm going to do and how I'm going to hustle and how I'm going to get the deals in. And then on October 1st, called a new meeting and said, I will do the best I can with what I can carry when it comes to work. Your jobs are, you know, are safe and protected and nothing will happen there. But I need to be at home as much as possible, because what I will regret more is time missed with my dad over, you know, not hitting a certain number on my production. So I am choosing my dad. And I just had to commit to that.
Yeah. And for those of you that don't know, like, working in real estate, if you don't close deals, you don't get paid. So there's a lot of moments where you can, if you're not bringing in deals, you're not bringing in a paycheck. So you were also battling that, right? And the fact that you chose your dad, I think, I mean, is another courageous moment, another moment of bravery, and just speaks to your guys' family dynamic, man. It's just like, hey, I want to make a trip to the compound one day, you know? Yeah, I think dealing with that grief is hard, and you making the decision to say, hey, I'm going to choose my dad over everything else was hard, but was also easy. What were the last few weeks of like being with him and being in hospice like?
So it started with in-home hospice. So, and do you mind if I share why we started hospice?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So on October 1st, we had a day with the family to do family pictures. My mom's best friend had gifted her like a time to come out and do family pictures for all of us to try to capture, you know, like last moments with dad. We didn't know how much time we had left, but we knew we were getting there, right? Like we knew that we were losing him, but we didn't know how soon. And so we did that on October 1st. Pictures in my grandma's backyard. All of us were there. All of his kids, grandkids, his mother, who at that time was 91. You know, so everyone is there for the pictures. It was a long day. Well, at the end of the day, my husband, Anthony, had already taken AJ home. I was there with my grandma and the baby and my mom and my dad, and we were getting ready to go home. And so we're getting ready to go home, and my parents watched me walk next door because we're all right there, right? So they watched me walk next door with the baby first. So I get home. And then when I get into my house, my husband stands at the door to watch my parents walk across the street. So everyone gets home. And so I remember holding the baby in the carrier, and I just heard Anthony say, "Your dad's about to fall," and he bolts out the door. And so then I get out and watch him, and my dad is holding on to the stairway, like to the railway for the stairs, and he couldn't move. And so then I watched Anthony come behind him and carry him up the stairs and lay him down on like inside their front room area, like once they opened the door. And in that moment was like, it was the hardest thing to watch because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know like if my dad was conscious when he was laid down. All I saw was, Anthony carrying him in and then laying him down. And then a couple moments later, then my dad started to move and Anthony helped him get to the couch. And so like you could breathe and, like, okay, he's okay in this moment. But that was the night that turned everything for my dad, where after that, he didn't trust walking anymore because like what happened was he lost control of his legs and he couldn't move them. And so the next day was when he told all of us that he was ready to start in-home hospice. So we started in-home hospice. And really what that means is just for people who aren't familiar with hospice or know like the stages of it, is it just means that they're no longer in treatment to try to fix, right, whatever's happening. Like there's no longer treatment to try to resolve someone's problems. It's just to keep them comfortable. So if they're in pain, we don't need to put them through tests or, exams to figure out what the pain is and fix the pain. We just need to give them something to cure the pain so that they stop feeling pain. And so even when he started in-home hospice, we didn't know how long, because some people could be on in-home hospice for months or even years. Because really what it means is just that you're just managing the pain and the symptoms, but not trying to find the root cause of it anymore. And so during that time, we spent a lot of time with them, I saw him almost every day. My son was still going there to be with them. And it was a time where it was, even though we spent a lot of time there, it was a lot of, like, the time was quieter, kind of, where the time we spent with him, if you would just sit in quietly with him, you would hear some of the things he'd want to share with you and the things that he wanted to make sure he said. During that time, he would tell us a lot about how much he loved us, and especially how much he loved my mom and how incredible she is. That was something that he always said and knew. And so, yeah, it was quieter. And at the end of it, when we knew it was time for him to go to a facility for hospice, because you can do in-home hospice or a facility, initially he wanted to pass at home. That was something that he said he wanted. And the other thing that he would tell us was that he wanted to pass when it was time, like in dignity and without pain and comfortably. And so it did come a time where we had to take him to an actual facility to make those things happen.
Yeah, that's I can't imagine what it was like just watching your dad go through the process of just like passing away.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're watching your dad, your hero,
Mm-hmm.
literally just as life is, literally taking him away. What did it feel real, like in that process? Like, were you like aware? Obviously, I know you're aware, but did it feel realistic as you're like just like watching life take him?
Yeah, it was really hard to watch because you watch it, like I watched him lose so many pieces of himself, so there was like, my dad he was a force of a person, right? Like he stood tall and strong in who he was, and everyone knew who he was. And he, like his voice would compel people. Like he was a force of a human. And he was also like just a giant teddy bear that looked really intimidating and really wasn't. But,
Right.
but you knew who he was. And seeing him become so small physically was really hard. And seeing him become like so physically weak was really hard, because that's not the person that I've known, and the physical body that I've known my whole life. And so to see that was really hard. But then also as he was in a hospice longer, for him to start losing parts of his mind, and you can tell within conversation, He was my confidant my whole life, and the person I could talk to about anything, and the person who I could have like debates with when it came to, whatever may be going on in the world or politically or, globally, whatever it is, like we could kind of, debate together and figure something out. And losing that and not having him not having his full mind was really hard and kind of a slow loss until the end.
So I know you guys were, I've said it a lot in this episode, but I know how close you guys were and all the conversations you had over the years. Do you remember your last conversation with him? And if you do, what were the last words that he told you?
Yeah. So he had an incredible strength within his mind to will himself through cancer. I believe that. I believe that he mentally willed himself to live as long as he did. And when he was done, he was done. And so when he was done, it was a Saturday, and he called each of the kids over. So all of us got to sit with them. His siblings sat with him individually. His grandkids sat with him individually. And he told each of us that he was done, that he was done fighting, and that he was in too much pain and he couldn't do it anymore. And he told each of us how much he loved us and how proud of us he was. And even for Anthony was traveling that day. And so we called him in, and that's one of the recordings I have and I listened to, where he told Anthony how proud of him he was and how much he loved him. And he thanked Anthony for being in my life, in our lives, and taking care of me and the babies. And so he made sure that before things really turned off and before he was really not there anymore, he spent that Saturday telling each of us exactly what we needed to hear.
He knew where he wanted. He knew who he was. He knew where he was going, and he knew that he was going to end it on the right note. He ended it with love. And that's what your family's about. Is love, right? Think about your living situation, how you guys live, and it's beautiful to see that he ended his life that way. When he passed, do you feel like a piece of you left with him?
Yeah. I knew when he passed. I wasn't there. He was at the hospice facility where he passed. We had all gone home. I knew the night before that was likely his last night, just based off of how things were going. But I remember waking up about an hour after he passed, in my own home, right away from the hospice center. I hadn't looked at my phone yet. We hadn't been notified yet. And I woke up and I knew that another world existed that he wasn't in anymore.
Grief is tough, man, especially when you lose a parent. And you and I had a conversation, and you shared something with me that hit me really, really hard. And you said, I never realized I had to build my own self-worth because my dad cheered for me so loud. When you told me that, I was just, yeah, I mean, I think I got emotional when you told me that too. Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah. So it was I've always felt that I was a confident person. And I know that. I know I hold myself with self-confidence. I know that what I'm capable of. And I just assumed that meant that I believed I was worthy until my dad died. And when he died, and it's like the stream of worthiness that he poured out into the universe to me my entire life, between his pride and his love and his support and his safety and his comfort and all of these things that always kept me so secure. When that stream stopped, then I realized I never had to build my own self-worth, because I never questioned it because of how hard he cheered for me and how much he was there. And so, yes, I was self-confident. Yes, I am capable. but I have never had to sit with myself and my own worthiness. And that was something I wasn't prepared for to come out of grief.
What was that realization like? Like, what was that like?
It was like, I felt like I didn't know who I was, and like an identity crisis, and like, and it was something like I knew how much of me was him, and I knew like, and I would tell people even when we were going through everything with him and knowing that the inevitable was going to come one day, of I knew how much of my light came from him, and so I would say like, I don't know what's going to happen to my light when his goes out. But I didn't realize that that would mean that I would also question my worthiness, period.
How did you begin to rebuild your worthiness, or are you still working on that right now?
I would say I think it'll always be something to work on, but I do feel like I was able to build it while grieving. And I think grief may have given me a little bit of a gift, as hard as it was to face and as hard as it was to sit with. It forced me to sit with myself and to work through things that were holding myself back, or things that I was telling myself that meant I was worthy, and just to face it. And something that really helped me was I was talking to a coach about it, which was kind of like a therapy session. So I highly recommend coaching all the time in some general, in some capacity, right? But and I brought this up, and she asked me, she was like, I hear you, but just want to ask you, everything your dad poured into you over your life, was that borrowed? Like, would he expect any of that back?
Mm.
And I was like, well, no, he gave it unconditionally. You know, I was like, still, I was like, no, of course it's not borrowed. She was like, so why do you think he took it with him when he died? Yeah.
And that was that like a healing moment for you, or was
Yeah.
like a moment of like a different perspective to help turn over a stone and kind of start, I guess, knowing that you don't have to have that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a moment of knowing that everything that he poured into me, I have. Like, everything that he poured into me is me and lives on through my kids and lives on through this community and the compound that we have. And, you know, everything that he did is still there. He didn't take that, you know, he didn't take that with him, and that he gave all of that unconditionally. And so I told myself, right? Like, it was a story that I told myself, that this love and this pride and all of these things were him giving me my worthiness, when really all of those things are just what he felt of me, period, regardless of any accomplishments or accolades or titles or whatever. That was just his love for me, period.
Mm. And I heard you in there, you mentioned that you felt like you got a kind of some form of like a gift through grief. And I think you might have touched on it a little bit, but what do you really truly feel that gift was that grief has given you?
Yeah, I think like one, two, people who are grieving out there too, just because we talk about like the gift of grief, I don't want to take away anyone's grief and where they're at, of knowing that the grief, it will never go away. Like, it'll never go away, but it will get easier to carry. Like, we will always carry it, right? But it'll get easier to carry, because as we continue through this human experience, through the good and the bad and all of the things, like, we will carry more things. And so this grief just becomes a part of us that's then helping us carry other things, right? And as we're doing that, we are also becoming stronger and more evolved to handle the human experience. So even though it'll never go away, we will learn to carry it better. And what really grief, like the gift that I feel like it gave me, was the ability to really think about my own mortality and the legacy of what that means and the impact that we make on people's lives without it sounding so morbid. Because to sit there and think about when you're going to die doesn't sound like the best conversation to start with, right?
Right.
But when you grieve someone you love, and you're grieving their life, either consciously or subconsciously, you are also thinking about your own mortality. At least that's what I experienced.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's a bar, as I would say. Like you drop, that's a great perspective. But also too, I think I talk about it often, but like a lot of these hard lessons, a lot of things that we go through, it teaches us so much about ourselves and so many things that we need to learn about ourselves. Like think about what you said about what your dad, like he was cheering for me so loud. Like I didn't know that I needed to love myself this way as soon as he was gone. You got, it sounds like you got a lot of gifts out of a tragic moments after everything you've experienced, right? I asked you who was Veronica before 2020, right? So as we sit here in Arlington, Texas, right? Who is Veronica Arrieta today?
Oh, I'd say Veronica is still figuring it out. Like I'm in a phase now of just being very open to the quiet and the processing and the sitting with the things so that I can actually be able to listen and hear what's for me next.
I like that. Yeah, listening is important.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you things that you need to know about yourself, and it tells you where you should go next and where you shouldn't go next. But the biggest thing is like, are you going to listen? Are you not going to listen? If your dad was sitting here right now, what would he say to you?
Oof. I know he would tell me he's proud of me. He never shied away from telling anyone how much he was proud of me and all of his kids, and everyone that he loved. So any opportunity he would have to share that, I know that he would. And I also know that I know how much he meant it every time. And he would tell me how beautiful his babies are, my kids, and how fun they are and how spicy they are, especially my daughter. And then he would always end it by saying, I love you more.
Mm. Do you pass that on to your kids and to your husband and the rest of your family?
Yeah. So like my sister and I do it back and forth, and same with like some members of the family. We try it like with my son, he's 4, right? So when we start I love you more, it becomes a much like he's like, I love you times a million galaxies plus 100. And he's not great at counting yet. So
Right. I love that though. Like let's play the game of like who loves each other more. Like can we spread that out into the world? So I love that. I think it's so cool. Like I love you more, and then you, like you said, you can expand on that. I think that's adorable, and we should bring more of that into the world. All right, I have one last question for you, right?
Okay.
So the show is called The Wiggle Room. You've shared a ton of wiggle room moments with us, so I don't know if you have any, but I'm still gonna ask. Share a time in your life where you didn't have anywhere to go,
Mm-hmm.
where you ran out of space. Can you tell me about a time in your life when Veronica ran out of wiggle room?
Yeah. I would say this one's more recent for me, and I'm still adjusting to it. But it's, I think, one of the gifts that I received out of grief and losing my dad was, so when I lost my dad, so right, that's November of 2023, still working, running a branch, trying, working on my own production in this industry, continued to do that until about summer of 2024. And that's really when I hit the moment through my grief and my own processing. And again, my own, like recognizing my own mortality and what I want in my life and where my priorities should be and what I should be working on and all of those things, to realize that I needed to drastically change my business. At the time, I had a loan officer assistant who I love dearly, who is incredible to me for many years.
We love Crystalline.
Love Crystalline. And I had, though, to make a decision that I couldn't keep her anymore. And ultimately, I knew that I was moving myself closer to pulling away from leading altogether. But I had to do it in pieces to make sure that everyone would be okay through that transition. Because for me, in processing and thinking about my own mortality and thinking about like, what do I want for my life and the impact that I have on people, there's no such thing as like a work and personal life balance, right? Like there's no such thing as like trying to be a mom at home with 2 kids and a wife and a daughter and a friend and all of these things, and a manager of a branch, helping other loan officers and other people with their business, and producing my own business and answering to the needs of borrowers and agents and providing for my family to do all of those things. Like, it's just realizing that it's not possible to try to juggle all of those things, and also knowing and accepting that my worthiness wasn't dependent on the title of being a branch manager. And if that's true, and if I believe that, and I do, then why am I not spending time and energy and resources with the people that my legacy really does carry, to try to hold this thing alive? And so my no wiggle room moment was when I had to make the decision of letting Crystalline go.
Which is hard. If you aren't familiar with the mortgage business and how it works, like, your support is everything to you. And in addition to that, you guys are deep friends. And so I know I kind of started this out with like, you found yourself, I think, and you're still finding yourself through all this. But I feel like you're in a good place, and it life is crazy, man. It's so unfortunate. Like, we have to learn these hard lessons through pain and through all these things. But I've told you a million times, like, when I'm going through something hard and I'm experiencing something hard, I think about you, because I'm like, man, you're complaining over spilled milk right now. Like, think about everything that Veronica had to push through. And that was like one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring you on here, is because pick your heart, man. Pick your heart, pick your heart, and to show you that no matter how hard something does feel, like, you can make it through. So I'm so grateful for your story. You are a true inspiration to me. Like, I've told you, I'll yell it from the top of the tallest building in the world. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your friendship. I'm grateful for your friendship, and I'm glad that you were here to share your story.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Do you want to leave us with anything before you get out of here?
Yeah, I would say the only thing is that for me, because when you look at all of these things that have happened, is the thing that does really drive me and help me is gratitude and that perspective, right? And being able to be grateful for the things that we have, even when they're the hard things. Like, something that really helped me, like, while I was processing everything with Crystalline and needing to make the decision to let her go, but how do I do it the right way so that she's okay? And then in looking back at where my family has been, and like financially, the decisions that I made that put us where we are, of even being grateful for like the fact that I could utilize credit cards during the time when I could be with my dad. I could utilize credit cards to make sure that, I was able to keep my assistant for as long as I possibly could. And I never thought I'd say I'm like grateful for credit card debt, right? But it's like, I'm grateful that I had an option. And, and that's what drove me, even like with everything with AJ. Like, when he was diagnosed, it was, I'm grateful for the doctor who had to give me the worst news of my life and had to sit there and do that. And I'm grateful that by some fate, we were only 15 minutes away from one of the clinics that could actually treat this in the country. Like, with everything when we went through everything with the miscarriage, like, I'm grateful that I knew what was happening so I could say goodbye. Like, I'm grateful with my dad that I was able to tell him every single thing that I wanted to before he died. And because I've been able to find the moments of gratitude, and they could be big moments or little moments, like, now I do a daily practice of just a quick gratitude list every morning of the things I'm grateful for. But that really keeps me going and helps me be able to handle all of these things. Because even though, like I said, I'll never say everything happens for a reason. As hard as all of the things have been, I am grateful that I have had the opportunity to learn and grow and evolve and figure out how I am going to respond to these things, because this is the human experience and we can't control it as much as we try. So let's be grateful through it.
Mm. Yeah, I love it. That's beautiful. Veronica's story is an inspiration, as I've said several times. Resiliency, perseverance, strength. I think her story just tells you exactly what you need to hear, and that no matter how hard it is, you can make it through it. And that to find some gratitude, there's always a way to find gratitude in whatever you're going through, and that can bring you back to center, and it can help you work through things easier and better. And that no matter what you're carrying, it'll eventually feel lighter. And thanks for listening. See y'all soon.